Hey there, everyone. Professor Kelsey here. We're going to look today at nutrition fundamentals. So this is the first segment in our nutrition module this week. There's a lot to cover, and often this is students' favorite module of the class. Lots of students want to improve their eating habits, and my goal here is to help you find simple, straightforward, and actionable ways to do that. Let's dive in. So our objectives of this lesson are to explore what it means to eat well. So what is healthy eating? Lots of times people set goals to eat healthy, but we don't really know what that is. We'll define what calories and different macronutrients are, and then we'll look to understand the concepts of nutrient versus energy or calorie density. So what does it mean to eat well or eat healthfully and nutritiously? Take a minute to ponder this. You've probably said at some point in your life or heard somebody say, I just need to, quote, eat better. But there are a lot of different things that this can mean depending on the way that you look at it. So some different ways that nutrition can impact you or that you might think about eating well are how nutrition has an impact on your genetics. So the field of epigenetics shows that our genes can actually be modified by our environment and our behaviors. And some of the things in our environments that can modify our genes are the foods we choose to eat or not eat. So for example, eating broccoli and other cruciferous vegetables can activate genes that help reduce the risk of developing cancer. There's lots of other ways that our food can impact our genetics. You might, however, think about the cultural implications of food. Food is a connector. Food brings us together. When we look at our blue zones, we see that one of the healthy habits that these places have is that many of them share meals together. They eat slowly, they sit down, and they enjoy each other's company, which makes a difference. You might think about your food's impact on your mental health or your spiritual health, or the inverse of that, your mental health impact on how you eat. These things will definitely be related. We've talked about how certain foods, especially those high in omega-3 fatty acids or high in vitamins and minerals, can have a positive impact on our mental health. So maybe eating well means eating in a way that improves your mental health. Again, we can think about social support and connection. We might think about how food impacts our body composition, which we defined last week, how it helps us either build muscle mass or reduce fat mass or build bone tissue. It's important for that as well, or some combination of those things. And we might also think about how our eating habits impact the environment and how the environment impacts our food. So there's a ton of tie-ins here. You can think of our 8-factor wellness model and see how all of these things are incredibly connected to the foods that we eat or don't. So when we say, I want to eat healthy, or I want to eat better, or I want to eat well, let's think a little bit more about what we actually mean. There's no right or wrong way to eat. And the cool thing about us as individuals is that bioindividuality says that the diet that works best for me won't be the same as the diet that works best for you. And that's okay. So sometimes it can feel really confusing or perplexing to understand best nutritional practices or nutritional science or research or what's coming out in the news. You really want to get clear on how you're looking for nutrition to impact your well-being. Is it your mental health, your physical health, the environment, your body composition, your social groups? Oftentimes these things can actually overlap, such that the food that best impacts your mental and physical health might also be good for the environment. So we'll use this framework as we move forward to examine not only what we eat, but how we eat and why this week. Okay, so let's first dive in to calories and macronutrients. Many of you have probably heard the term calorie before, and a calorie is a unit of measurement. So a calorie is a measurement of an amount of energy. You remember back last week when we talked about ATP, adenosine triphosphate. That's the chemical form of energy that your muscle cells use to create movement. However, that chemical form of energy has to come from something. We know that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. So the energy that we get to create ATP comes in the form of the calories that we eat in our food. So calories, while they sometimes get a bad rap, are just energy. And the actual measurement of this is we use the big C, capital C calorie when we're talking about the calories in food, but there are actually small c calories that we have to look at first. So 1 gram calorie or small c calorie is the amount of energy in food that it will take to increase the temperature of 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. So it's a standardized measurement of energy. 1,000 of those little things equals our big C calorie, the unit of measurement for energy that you see on your food package labels, which we'll talk about in another lesson. So that's what a calorie actually is. Calories aren't bad. They're not bad for you. You need calories to survive. You need calories to be able to do all the things that you do in the world, whether that's exercise or whether that's talk or complete your homework, or even just to lay in bed and beat your heart and move blood through your body and breathe and think thoughts. All of those things require calories. So we do want some of these things. It's just that when we get too much of them or some less nutritious forms, that we can run into some problems. And our calories primarily come from 3 major macronutrient groups. Think macro meaning big, so things that you need a lot of. These 3 macronutrient groups are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And we're going to look at each of these more in detail in this lecture. So this is where you find your calories from in your diet. One note here is that alcohol also contains calories. So you will get calories from alcohol, but we don't consider it a macronutrient because it's not essential for life. So to varying extents, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats are essential for life, different amounts for different individuals and different purposes. You do get calories from alcohol, but it's not required that you consume it, so it's not considered a macronutrient. Okay, so let's look at these in a little more detail. You get a different number of calories from each of your macronutrients. Kcal is another way that you'll see the big capital C calorie written. So our carbohydrate and protein foods will give us 4 calories per gram. That's a measurement of weight per gram of food. And we'll look at what some of the examples of carbohydrates and proteins are in a minute. So 4 calories per gram. When we look down at our fat foods, foods that are high in fat, these give us 9 calories per gram of food. So for the same amount of food, you get more calories from fat than you do from carbs or protein. So a nice example of this is if you look at the spoons over to the right of the screen and you see a spoonful of sugar and a spoonful of oil, let's say that that's olive oil, and both are 5 grams in weight, you'll see that the oil is 45 calories, whereas the sugar is 20 calories. And now that's, again, not to say that one food is healthier than the other or better than the other. It's just an example of how fats yield a greater amount of energy per unit. So you get about twice as much calories or energy from fat as you do from carbs and protein. So that's just something to know as we move forward. Interestingly, in the 1980s, people thought, well, we're eating too many calories and we're gaining weight. We need to reverse this trend. And so people realized, of course, fat has twice as many calories as either protein or carbohydrates do. What we should do is cut out fat. But you'll see that this didn't actually generally help people's weight or their health. Fat, just like protein and carbs, is an essential macronutrient that we need to function well. And it actually has a lot of positive roles in our hunger and fullness levels, in our hormonal health. And so cutting this nutrient way down or out actually harmed people's health. So we do need all 3 of these for reasons you'll see as we move forward. So calorie balance is an important component. And that's just balancing the amount of calories that you take in with the amount of calories that you expend over a given period of time. So over time, if your calorie intake and expenditure is about even, your weight should stay around the same, all things considered. If your calories expended, your calories burned, and we'll look at what goes into that in a minute, is more than the calories you take in, you'll lose weight. You may see some health changes related to that as well, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. And then if your calories are excessive, you might gain weight compared to the calories that you're burning. Again, this will have some health impacts, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, depending on the weight that you start at. So we already know that our carbohydrates, protein, and fat make up our calories in, also alcohol if you're consuming it. Our calories out are made up of three things as well: your resting metabolic rate, which is shorthanded as RMR, physical activity, which is all movement, and thermic effect of feeding, which is shorthanded as TEF. So let's break these down a little bit. Your resting metabolic rate is the amount of calories that it costs you to stay alive in a day if you did nothing all day. So if you just laid in bed all day and didn't move, you would still burn calories. You need calories and energy just to exist, to beat your heart, to pump your blood, to breathe air, to think thoughts, to build hormones and neurotransmitters and repair tissues. That's all part of your resting metabolic rate. And this is actually the biggest portion of calories you burn in a day. For most people, it's about 60 to 80% of the total calories that you burn. So a lot is coming in just keeping your body alive. Let's jump down to TEF, thermic effect of feeding. This is a small amount. This is the calories that it costs your body to digest and absorb your food. So you actually do have to put some work in to get energy out of the food that you eat. This is thermic effect of feeding, and this is about 10% of the calories you burn in a day, so not huge. And then lastly, we have physical activity. And as you'll recall from last week, this is all voluntary bodily movement. So not just going for a run or lifting weights, it's walking to class, it's moving around at work, it's getting in and out of the car, it's caring for your kids. All physical movement counts, and that's about 20 to 30% of the calories that you burn in a day. So if you want to adjust this ratio for whatever reason, let's say you want to lose weight, you either need to slightly drop down the calories coming in, and we'll talk about some strategies for that, or slightly increase the calories going out. But what can happen if you decrease your calories going in too much is that RMR, resting metabolic rate, can drop down. And we don't want that to happen because that's the biggest percentage of calories we burn in a day. We'll talk about this a little more in our next lecture on the psychology of eating. If you wanted to gain weight, you'd need to increase your calories in by consuming more food or find ways to decrease your calories out, which is not always recommended because we know physical activity is good. So that's a little bit about calorie balance. How are you supposed to know how many calories you need in a day though? Well, you could go to a physiology lab and get this measured using an RMR test, your resting metabolic rate test. They'd strap an oxygen monitor onto you and measure how much oxygen goes in and carbon dioxide comes out. And they'd be able to use that to determine how many calories you're burning per day at rest, and then use some calculations to factor in your thermic effect of feeding and physical activity. However, that's not very practical for most people. So you can use an online calculator like MyPlate to determine your calorie needs in a day. This is a rough estimate. This is going to take things in like your age, your sex, your biological sex, your height, your weight, and your self-reported activity level to estimate the amount of calories that you need in a day using a calculation. So maybe it'll tell you 2,000 or 2,300 or 2,500. That is an estimation of the calories that you might need in a day, but it's not perfect. Then sometimes people can count calories to determine if they're getting close to that amount. And you'll actually try this for a day with your assignment for this module, where you track your nutrition either using MyFitnessPal or some other online tracker for a day. You'll input everything that you eat and measure it and see if it matches up to what MyPlate suggests you need to eat in a day. Now, I just want to include an important caveat that calorie counting is shown to have up to a 30% margin of error, meaning that it can be 30% off. So you might think that you're eating 2,000 calories a day, but you're actually eating 2,600. And typically it's off in that direction where people think they're eating less than they are because they're not adequately measuring their portion sizes or counting everything that they eat. That's all that to say is that this is one strategy for determining your energy needs in a day, but it's not a foolproof one. So we're going to talk about some other more practical strategies to get the amount and types of nutrition that you need to live a healthy lifestyle. Let's dive into macronutrients and their functions next. I'm going to go ahead and pause this So you can have a chance to stop, get some water, take a break, go for a walk, whatever you need to do.